Well, thanks for coming back. Welcome to Understanding Slowly Changing Dimensions, Part 2. And here in Part 2, I want to dig just a little deeper into these Type 1 and Type 2 slowly changing dimensions. And do keep in mind that this is something you need to understand for the exam. You will get presented a situation where you have slowly changing dimensions, and you'll need to understand the difference between a Type 1 and Type 2. And based on the context of the question, you'll be expected to be able to make the correct choice based on what they describe. So let's get to this here. First of all, when we're talking about a Type 1 slowly changing dimension, we're simply talking about a situation where any updates in the OLTP data are moved into the data warehouse. And so if some data changes that's part of my dimensions in the data warehouse, we just overwrite whatever changes into the data warehouse data. We don't worry about it. No big deal. Past actual data history is lost. The very next time I run a report, whatever the new data is in the dimension is what it's going to show. And in the example I used in Part 1, all of my sales are going to be reflected in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, at first glance, let me go back to this just a moment. At first glance, you're sitting there scratching your head and you're thinking, wow, that's a dumb way to do it. I mean, you just lost all your historical accuracy here. Well, that totally depends on your company, the data that you're reporting, what you're looking for here. It could be that for your particular business, the location of the sale is not really that important. And so that's just the way it is sometimes, okay? So you want to watch for this, and that would be your flag on the exam. If the past actual data history being lost or overwritten is no big deal, then you can certainly use a Type 1 slowly changing dimension because this is, number one, going to be the simplest thing to do. You don't have to change anything about the structure of your dimension table, and everybody's happy, and we just keep pumping the data in. Now, a Type 2 slowly changing dimension is a little different. We don't just overwrite data in the data warehouse. Now, you could have guessed that, no doubt, but let's talk about how we're going to do it. We're going to have to insert a new row for that customer into our dimension table. Now, that's going to create a problem for itself there, because this is usually going to create primary key problems, because our primary key in our dimension table is most likely going to be tied to, for example, if it's a customer table, I've got a primary key up there based on a customer ID. Well, guess what? I've already got a row in there in that dimension table for Mark Long, and I've got a customer ID. Well, how am I going to add a second row for Mark Long with a different address that doesn't still identify me as the same customer, just operating from a second address? If I try to use that same customer ID again, it's going to violate the primary key, and it's going to squawk at me and not let me put the data in. So now what I've got to do is add another key to my data warehouse, to the dimension table that's being affected here, and I'm going to add what's called a surrogate key. And you'll also hear this called a data warehouse key or a DW key. But a surrogate key is a key that I create and that I increment on my own, and this helps me keep all of my rows identical. So if I've got a surrogate key that every time I insert a new row it just increments by 1, I could have, for example, in a dimension table, I could have the customer ID of 3, but my surrogate key number could be 5 or 6. And so I'm customer ID 3 with a surrogate key of, say, 5. I could add another line, customer ID of 3, my surrogate key of 7, and have the new address in there. And so I'm in the dimension table twice, but I'm identified as the same customer, but with different information. And this way, I can use that surrogate key to uniquely identify every row in the dimension table. And even if some aspects of those rows match, the surrogate key still tells me this indeed should be in here. There's something different about these two rows. And I would probably am going to add another column or two. You'll have to do this as well, because I'm going to need some way to flag, okay, this one customer has 2 rows in my dimension table now. which one of these is the current one? Which one should we ship data to? Which one is the one who's placing orders? Which one is really impacting our sales at this point? And I probably want to provide some sort of date or time perspective so that I can know when this change happened. All right, so that's going to be the difference. Now, here's the flag, here's the key to watch for on the exam. Anytime data can't just be overwritten in the data warehouse in the dimension tables, and you've got a slowly changing dimension, and if you're going to have to maintain historical accuracy on your data, you're looking at a type 2 slowly changing dimension. Now you can do a hybrid solution between a type 2 and a type 1 and use the flag to say, which one should be used. I don't want to go that deep right now and confuse you. Probably shouldn't even have said that. But the thing you need to watch for is make sure you understand the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 slowly changing dimension. Now in part 3, I'm going to give you a visual representation of this, and if you're not totally clear on it right now, I think that'll really kind of push you over the edge and help you understand exactly what I'm talking about here with these slowly changing dimensions. So I'll end part 2 here. Join me for part 3, and we'll look at a visual of slowly changing dimensions.